Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
In the dense, sun-dappled forests and along the winding rivers of what is now modern-day Florida, a remarkable story unfolded over centuries. The Timucua people, an indigenous group known for their vibrant culture and deep connection to the land, inhabited these regions long before the arrival of European colonizers. Yet, interwoven into the rich tapestry of their history lies a thread that is often overlooked: the African heritage that came to influence, shape, and contribute to their story. This narrative, buried beneath layers of historical erasure and colonial misconceptions, is as fascinating as it is complex. As one stands on the shifting sands of Florida's coastline or gazes into the dark waters of its wetlands, it is easy to feel the weight of history hanging in the humid air. These lands bear witness to encounters between worlds that collided, mingled, and ultimately transformed one another. Among these encounters was the meeting of African peoples, brought to the Americas through the brutal transatlantic slave trade, and the indigenous Timucua tribes. While the popular imagination often confines African history in the Americas to tales of plantation slavery and rebellion, the true story is far broader, encompassing vibrant cultural exchanges, acts of survival, and mutual resilience. To understand the African heritage of the Timucua people, one must first grasp the tumultuous historical forces that shaped their environment. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century marked the beginning of an era of profound disruption and transformation for both the Timucua and the enslaved Africans who were brought to these shores. This shared adversity created opportunities for connection, solidarity, and cultural blending that left lasting imprints on the region's history. However, the story of African influence on the Timucua is not merely one of survival amid hardship. It is also a tale of creativity, adaptation, and enduring human spirit. This history invites us to reconsider the simplistic narratives of domination and resistance that often dominate discussions of colonial encounters. Instead, it encourages us to see the nuanced interplay of cultures that gave rise to new traditions, languages, and ways of life. As we delve into this intricate history, we uncover a hidden legacy that speaks to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of cultural exchange in the face of unimaginable odds. Before exploring the African connections, it is crucial to paint a vivid picture of the Timucua world prior to European contact. The Timucua people were not a single, monolithic group, but rather a network of semi-autonomous chiefdoms united by a shared language and cultural practices. They occupied a vast territory stretching from southeastern Georgia to central Florida, living in harmony with the land and developing sophisticated systems of agriculture, trade, and governance. Their villages, often nestled along rivers or near fertile lands, were centers of activity and innovation. Timucua artisans created intricate pottery, wove textiles from native plants, and carved tools and ceremonial objects from wood and bone. Their religious beliefs, deeply rooted in their environment, revolved around the cycles of nature, the spirits of animals, and the power of the sun and moon. Ceremonial dances, storytelling, and oral traditions played a central role in preserving their history and reinforcing communal bonds. Yet, this vibrant world was forever altered by the arrival of Spanish explorers in the early 1500s. Hernando de Soto and his men, seeking gold and glory, brought with them disease, violence, and enslavement. The once thriving Timucua population, estimated to be around 200,000 at the time of contact, began to dwindle rapidly due to epidemics and warfare. In this tumultuous period of upheaval, the seeds of African influence will be sown. The African presence in Timucua territories can be traced back to the earliest days of Spanish colonization. Africans arrived in the Americas through various means, as enslaved laborers, as free men and women accompanying Spanish expeditions, and in some cases as escapees who sought refuge among indigenous communities. These early African arrivals brought with them not only their physical labor, but also their cultural practices, knowledge systems, and spiritual beliefs. One of the most significant periods of African influence began with the establishment of Spanish missions in Timucua lands during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. The missions were part of Spain's broader effort to Christianize and assimilate indigenous populations, but they also became sites of cultural convergence. Enslaved Africans were often employed in the construction and maintenance of these missions, and their presence brought them into close contact with the Timucua people. In the shared spaces of missions, farms, and frontier settlements, Africans and Timucua individuals forged connections born of necessity and mutual understanding. Both groups found themselves marginalized and exploited within the colonial system, and this shared plight created opportunities for solidarity. Enslaved Africans brought agricultural knowledge that complemented the Timucua's own expertise. Together, they cultivated crops such as maize, beans, squash, and rice, blending Old World and New World agricultural practices to sustain their communities. The exchange of cultural practices extended beyond agriculture. African and Timucua people shared techniques for crafting tools, building shelters, and preparing food. African culinary traditions, including methods of seasoning and cooking, began to influence local diets. Music and dance, integral aspects of both cultures, also became intertwined. The rhythms of African drums blended with Timucua chants, creating new forms of expression that echoed across the Florida landscape. Perhaps one of the most profound areas of cultural exchange occurred in the realm of spirituality. Both African and Timucua belief systems were deeply rooted in an understanding of the natural world and the spiritual forces that governed it. While the Spanish sought to impose Catholicism, the resilience of African and Timucua spiritual practices ensured their survival, albeit in transformed and syncretic forms. Africans introduced rituals, symbols, and practices associated with their ancestral religions, which often found resonance with Timucua traditions. For instance, both cultures placed significant emphasis on the veneration of ancestors and the use of spiritual intermediaries to communicate with the divine. This shared spiritual framework facilitated the blending of rituals and the creation of hybrid religious practices that persisted despite colonial suppression. The bonds between Africans and the Timucua were not merely cultural, they were also forged in acts of resistance against the colonial system. Both groups resisted Spanish domination in various ways, from open rebellion to more subtle forms of defiance, such as work slowdowns and the preservation of forbidden traditions. Enslaved Africans who escaped from Spanish plantations often sought refuge among the Timucua, finding allies and sanctuary in their villages. These acts of solidarity and resistance were not without risks. The Spanish authorities viewed such alliances as threats to their control and responded with brutal reprisals. Yet, the resilience of African and Timucua communities ensured the survival of their cultural legacies, even in the face of relentless persecution. The African heritage of the Timucua people is a testament to the enduring power of cultural exchange and human resilience. Though the Timucua as a distinct group were largely displaced and assimilated by the 18th century, their story lives on in the cultural and historical fabric of the region. The blending of African and indigenous traditions gave rise to new cultural forms that continue to influence the southeastern United States today. This history challenges us to rethink simplistic narratives of cultural erasure and loss. Instead, it invites us to recognize the dynamic and ongoing processes of cultural adaptation and survival that define the human experience. The African heritage of the Timucua people is not just a story of the past. It is a living legacy that reminds us of the interconnectedness of all peoples and the transformative power of shared history.